Can't hear you, Jim.
Okay, folks, we're recording, and please drop any questions and comments into the chat. We'll make sure that we get to all those, or any that we can't, we'll absolutely follow up on with you one-on-one. I want to start off by introducing our presenter, Lee Lorenzen. Lee and I met many years ago, and he was founding a very cool company called Fractal Design, which did amazing things for artists and creation of content. Since then, he and I have both been founding companies with our own share of successes and failures. As Lee will tell you, he's founded, invested in, and guided a ton of companies. He has a way of distilling that experience into really actionable advice, which you'll find today. Lee and I reconnected last year and started developing PartnerMotion, which is really our expression of our shared passion for helping other founders succeed. We help companies with almost anything they're working on, but our focus is really around fundraising, go-to-market, API strategy, partnering, and exits. We help strategically, but we also get our hands dirty helping with your deck, go-to-market plans, designing growth experiments, creating detailed API strategies, all those things we've done many times before in our companies. We'd love to get on a call with anybody on the call here for an hour or so, just to brainstorm your own situation, your own challenges and opportunities. Great to get acquainted, and we always learn something in those, and hopefully there's always a good idea or two which come out of them. So before I turn it over to Lee, I wanted to give you guys some context that you've already probably seen, unless you're living under a rock, to the current situation in the markets and startup capital. Obviously, the public markets are pretty volatile and generally moving downward, apparently today again, which feeds back into the private markets with some lag. And I would say within the private markets, it feeds back first to VC and then probably to other sources of funding, such as angel funding. We're going to talk about all that today. This first chart shows what we've all heard. The amount of funding is down overall in 2022 so far, with many people predicting it will go lower in the next quarter. On the next slide, there's a breakdown for just legal tech. This comes to us courtesy of Raymond at legalcomplex.com. Terrific resource for finding out what's happening in the funding community and building your own deck. So I encourage you to get in touch with Raymond if you can use that kind of data at legalcomplex.com. You see the same kind of decline. As Raymond's pointed out, it's not at pre-pandemic levels yet, but I think that's what we have to have our eye on. This last chart, next one, Lee, there is breaks it down interestingly across investor segments. As I said, it tends to hit VC first and then follow in the angel categories. Although when the market moves down, you can have a really serious immediate impact on angels, since it's coming out of their accounts generally. So hopefully other forms of funding will hang on longer. The takeaway here is that we're heading into more challenging times for fundraising. This implies being very careful about where you're spending your money and how you're spending your money. A lot of companies are taking hard looks at their budgets right now and figuring out where they can cut back. I think that's very sensible, having been through a few of these downturns myself as a founder. And to put more effort into your fundraising, and importantly, to also be thinking about the other parts of your overall strategy. You know, what your partnering strategy, your potential soft landings, if you're in an area that's going to be consolidating, and you know, to think long-term about your company now, and to get involved with those other areas. So I also want to touch one more topic before I turn it over to Lee, and that is, what are some of the typical objections that we've heard to legal tech from investing sources? And a couple of ideas here maybe to take away on things to think about on how you position it. You know, when we work with companies on their fundraising pitches and deck, a lot of the work is around identifying weaknesses and figuring out how to mitigate those in the presentation and how you frame things. So a lot of people say the legal tech market is too small, but I've seen terrific presentations that can prove there's a high sound in this area, and to point to the unicorns and IPOs that have happened in legal tech. Noise in the background there. And to frame, as it says here, to frame legal as the last greenfield, really, that legal is finally coming to the cloud and that's going to create a tremendous amount of opportunity. And really importantly, as you frame the size of your opportunity and the size of your addressable market, to be thinking about the additional product modules you want to sell, to be thinking and presenting and modeling how your global expansion works, what the adjacent areas you can move into, so that you can tell the story for the investor that involves a larger addressable market. You also hear from people, hey, lawyers don't know how to buy software. Legal partnerships are all about individual economics and not the enterprise. Well, to that, I would say legal ops has made a lot of progress in making them better. Clock was the biggest it's ever been last week, and clients are forcing the move toward more efficient technologies and applying technologies to legal. I think your integration strategy also needs to be presented as a way to provide sales leverage that doesn't require the buyer to make another purchase decision for a platform. If you can work inside the Microsoft platform or the Google platform and take advantage of that leverage, that's a great way to answer that objection. I also think it's a positive in the long run that lawyers are slow to move, because once you get them in sort of a land grab mode, you're going to have lower churn over the life of the relationship, which is good. So the final objection I hear all the time from investors is, oh, I only do hard technology, right? Give me some hard technology. I'm not looking for something that is just simple software. I think my answer to that is there have been a lot of winners without it. In a land grab situation, you don't necessarily have to have something that is hard, patentable, protectable technology and turf, but also you can emphasize that machine learning and artificial intelligence, these are all hard sciences. They're becoming commoditized on some level, but if you can leverage those in your product, it's going to help you paint a picture of a more defensible technology position. So those are just a few thoughts on those. Let me also point you to a resource that we've put together for you, which is, we went through a whole bunch of slides from legal tech funding decks and pulled out what we thought were some of the most illustrative. And it's organized by use of funds, competition, team, all those sorts of things. So once you get this link, I'll put this in the chat as well, and you can check out those funding deck slides. For me, it's always a matter of, when I'm approaching a deck, getting some inspiration, seeing how other folks have framed a similar issue, and I think it's helpful. There's about 30 or 40 examples of slides in that deck. So with that, let's talk a little bit about the overall universe and the alternative funding sources you have and how to tell your story. So Lee, I'll give it to you now.
Yeah, thanks, Jim. And thanks for the very kind introduction. I'll tell the real story. I've started 32 different companies. 25 have failed completely, losing my money and all the investors' money. So now I'm going to take 1 minute describing each of those. That's just kidding. I've got a more interesting story than that. Really, storytelling is fundamental to fundraising. And so, you think about I love this cartoon, it's my favorite. Are you coming hunting, or are you going to sit around here all day inventing? And this is really the challenge that every entrepreneur and inventor has, which is you have some vision for the future and you lack resources. This guy may need some ammunition or a screwdriver, whatever he might need. But all the people around him, or many of the people around him, don't really understand. They don't get it. They don't see the future. And so they tend to be more discouraging than encouraging. And they're certainly not whipping out their checkbooks to help. So the way I think about this story is really this 3-step process to fundraising, is that if your current audience is a bunch of naysayers, then you have to find a new audience. And that's part of what we'll talk about today, is how to assemble that audience. And then you have to be very effective in telling your story. And I've learned a lot through all of these failed startups and some of the successful ones about what works and what doesn't. And I've really done a lot of research throughout my career of studying startups and figuring out the ones whose story was most compelling. And actually, that leads me to one thing. If in the chat, this is the first time I've really given this pitch as a fundraising pitch, so you'll help me out if periodically, if you put a thumbs up in there, if I say something that resonates with you. It'll also help out the rest of the people who are, multitasking like I often do on Zooms, checking email as well as halfway listening to. They'll know that they've maybe hit a point that they want to pay attention to. So feel free to just put a thumbs up in the chat right now if you want, or a smiley face, just to let me know you're there. The other thing is that, once you can find the right audience, the real key is to tell the right story to the right people in the right way. And that's what we're going to go through today. And this fundraising system, just like the guy sitting there working on his Gatling gun, this is sort of our Gatling gun. this is what makes us special. So let's get to it. Assembling the audience. So the key here is to realize that you have the scarcest currency. It's very easy as an entrepreneur to think, oh man, we need money. It's so hard to find money. Dollars are hard to come by. All of that is true. One of my mentors, Jim's probably as well, Craig Johnson, he said that the only reason a startup fails is it runs out of money. I think I've amended that over time to say there's one other reason, that's if the founder quits and it runs out of money. Because even if you run out of money, if the founder's still in there kicking, you can sometimes kind of resurrect the startup. So, but money is clearly the key thing that's on the minds of a lot of entrepreneurs. And when you're in funding mode, it seems like, where do I get that next 5,000, 10,000, 50,000, depending upon what your burn rate is? What does it take to get to the next level? So it tends to breed this mindset of that the world is about scarcity, a lack of funding. And in reality, we live in a world of abundance. So you have the most scarce currency on the planet, which is equity in your company. The world is awash in dollars. And so there's a lot of people who have money. They need to find a home for that money that has a potential of return. And they're looking for places to put it. And for a certain class of investors, well, let's talk about that next. So where are they going to put it and how do you find these folks? I put yourself as the number one source of funds on this, because you have to believe your story first. And once you believe it, then you have to decide when to start your company. And many of you, obviously, you all already started the company, but when I work with startups, or we work with startups early days, one of the first things, if they haven't left their day job, is to keep your day job as long as possible. You can do a lot working part-time. I've had that experience in multiple startups. And let your current employer pay your burn rate, follow all the rules so you're not using the company's computer, et cetera, so you keep the IP rights to yourself. The next thing is you should talk to your spouse or significant other, if you have one, because at least with regard to any sort of money decisions, you need the support of the people closest to you as you take the risks of putting your own money into ventures. And so it's very useful to, at least in those, I probably have made that mistake a couple of times of not involving my spouse in some of the decisions that I made, much to my detriment. So the next part of that is to, and this is true with co-founders and team, you can get money from those sources as people writing checks themselves, but you can also extend the money that you do have through them not taking a salary. A big mistake that we see almost all founders do when we first get involved with them is that they're not taking a salary. The term of art is sweat equity, or they're talking employees into working for equity and not salary. And I think it's a big mistake. I think people should. It's not a mistake not to pay yourself, but it's a mistake not to book that salary as an obligation of the company. So deferred compensation is, I think, much preferred way to go. Set your salary at your market rate. And same thing for all your team, figure out what an hourly equivalent is, count the hours that you work, account for those hours in your balance sheet as an actual obligation of the company to be paid under certain conditions, maybe not all conditions. And this is where, a lot of times you hear, well, an investor doesn't want to put $1 million in and you've got 300K of deferred comp by the time they show up, they don't want that paid out. Sometimes that'll be true. Sometimes that'll be true. Karina, maybe you can go on mute. Sorry. That will be true, but the reality is it's sometimes not. Or they'll be willing during the term sheet process to say, well, we'll repay that, but maybe out of when the company first achieves revenue positive, or when the company has at least $2 million in the bank, like the subsequent funding comes in, or when the company gets to profitability, maybe they'll pay it out over the next 12 months after you reach profitability. So all of these things are ways to ultimately get that money paid back. If you don't book it at the beginning and put it on your balance sheet, you'll find it very difficult to negotiate it post facto. So you need to start that right away. Family and friends. One of the first startups that I did, family members of all my family members, frankly, my dad, mom, my two brothers, and my sister all invested a total of $45K into that company. The other founder, whose family was willing to invest, they invested $55K. So that was the $100K that we used to start the company. They got 10% of the company for that. It was an LLC. They did quite well. It was a 36x return on their investment. I remember being woken up at a family reunion and they're all wearing a t-shirt that said, "Are we rich yet?" And so it's just a fun thing to think about those early rounds where everyone says, oh, family and friends, don't do that, or you're gonna lose their money, or it's dumb money, or whatever you want to say. Well, it's not always dumb money. And second of all, these are people that are investing in you as an individual. And when you don't have traction, when you don't have, 1 million users growing to 2 million users, growing to 4 million users, or you don't have a lot of revenue, and you're at these very, very early stages, you really want to invest in people who know you and want you to win and are willing to lose, as it says down here, learn the first law of fundraising. I've said this, I've raised money for the sad thing about, well, the good thing, I guess, from all of these 32 startups, they all needed to raise money. The 25 that failed still needed to raise money. So in all of those conversations, I would say to every investor before they wrote a check, invest what you can afford to lose and have us stay friends, because our friendship means more to me than your investment. Everyone from my parents who invested in the early startup to Bill Gates and Jeff Bezos, who invested personally in one of my other startups. They all heard the same message from me. And it's a great way of relieving yourself as the CEO of this burden of thinking, well, if we screw this up, I can't go home for Christmas or whatever it is, because you've sent the real message, which is most startups fail. And by admitting that negative early, you're able to protect yourself and warn them that they really shouldn't invest stuff that to stick to this saying. So it served me well through a lot of years. The next group of items here, crowdfunding, angels, accelerators. One thing to keep in mind is that as you get to investors who have more deal flow, who see more potential investment opportunities, the questions are going to get much tougher. The hurdles are going to get much higher, and the valuation discussions are going to get much harder. We have techniques for managing those to your benefit, which we'll get into in just a few minutes. But you have to realize that as you move into those different areas, then you're really moving in. It's really more appropriate as you begin to gain traction to move into some of these areas, because you're going to be competing with all the other great opportunities that they see. As soon as they hear your pitch, they've got 5 other pitches or 20 other pitches they're hearing, and each of those have their own compelling stories. So it's just a lot harder as you move into those areas. What's much better are customers, corporate partners, and strategic investors. These folks, they don't really care about the return on their investment. They want to live in a world where your startup is super successful, and they live in if that happens, then their own company will be super successful. And that's what they're counting on. They just want you to be super successful, so their value return is their own stock in their own company or their own business that grows. That's on the customer case. Customers, they become very dependent upon your software. And so they want you to have the money that it takes to grow the software, add features, et cetera. But so again, they will be successful based upon your success, not based upon a return on investment. And so you see that in my list here, I don't really list VCs. I've raised money from one VC in my entire career. Jim has raised money from lots of VCs in his. So I think it is a place to go, but they are the highest high in terms of competitive deal flow pressure on you as a startup. So it's not impossible to get funding from VCs. My older son just got funded, I guess, what was it? You probably won't mind me saying, 7 million at a 35 million post for a PowerPoint, basically. And so it is possible to go out there with a vision and get your story funded. But a lot of planets have to align in order for that to happen. So moving on. So this will be what we get into next. Essentially, and I'll just dive right into the first slide. So the core issue of telling a story is that investors invest based upon fundraising is really 2 things. It's storytelling and it's momentum. And we'll get into how to sort of manage both of those. But the first part is storytelling. So when working with startups, what we often see is that they have they think, and as an engineer, software engineer, my background, it's like if we can add more features and serve more markets, then that'll be compelling to more people. And so they talk about a lot of things that they do. And so the challenge with that is that this is the best book on marketing ever written, by the way, by Rees and Trout. It was written in the early 80s, I think. It's 22 Immutable Laws of Marketing. This is the first law is the law, law of leadership. It's better to be first than it is to be better. So, in 10,000 years of recorded history, there were 3 billion people on the planet when he did it. Lindbergh was the first person to fly across the Atlantic solo. This other guy, in 10,000 years of history and 3 billion people on the planet, he was the second person, only the second person to fly across the Atlantic solo, but no one knows who Hinkler is. And so that's the challenge that everyone faces as we're building these different software companies. You're not going to be the first legal tech software. You have to find that the good news is there's something called the law of category. If you can't be first in a category, set up a category you can be first in. You may not be able to read the third plane on the picture there, but we got Lindbergh, Hinkler, and then Amelia Earhart. So she narrowed the category to be the first woman to fly across the Atlantic solo. And that's the challenge with each startup, is to kind of go through that process. Now, sometimes, and this is, again, modifications, it's all about positioning. And if you don't get the positioning right, then all the rest of the fundraising is going to get hard. So you have to tell the story. So we have the Altair, introduced in 1974. Bill Gates and Paul Allen wrote the basic for it, so it's the very first, PC that a person could actually buy and afford. They were truly the first in the market in the PC space. However, introduced in 1976, the Apple II became first in the mind of the marketplace, first in the mind of a critical mass of consumers. And this gets to the law of perception. So when you're marketing, you don't really say your product is better than that product by all of these features. What you're really saying is, I need to be the first in your mind when you think of this particular kind of thing. And that's why you narrow the product to something very narrow. And then they go on to talk about the ladder of the mind. Every single brand of every single category of product has a ladder in your mind. And someone has the first rung, the second rung, the third rung. And so they were able to carve out the first rung in that personal computer ladder. There was another ladder, which was mainframe computers, and IBM had the first rung in that. So you see the power of basically narrowing it and then winning the battle of perceptions. That's the marketing challenge. The next part of telling a story is and this is from Donald Miller. He was a screenwriter in Hollywood. And so he came at this kind of looking like, how do I tell the story of my startup, my internet startup that he was launching? And he was getting consulting requests from other people to help them improve their websites. And what he came up with was using the same, he calls it a story brand script, the same framework for all of these successful movies. So you've got a character, they have a problem, they meet a guide, gives them a plan, call to action. And if they're able to avoid failure, then they'll have success if they use that plan. And so that model, just to kind of show it, from a movie sense. So, Star Wars, we've got Luke, he's stuck on the planet, he's not really sure of himself, he's not confident, he meets Obi-Wan Kenobi. Obi-Wan tells him there's this other thing, it's called the Force, that's his system. If you trust the Force, you're gonna be okay. And then a call to action, well, let's go defeat the Empire. And if we fail at that, then the rebellion's crushed. That's the stakes in the game. But if we succeed, then we destroy the Death Star. The reason how this relates to a story, I just made one up for the Uber company was they had their one-liner basically. The way I thought of them anyway was a predictable ride-hailing service. Uber did, in my mind, Uber did no marketing because the very first time that I encountered Uber, it was over-the-shoulder viral. So you're standing around at a conference or whatever, and you're trying to call a cab or figure out how you're going to get to the next space. And then you see over the shoulder, this woman's kind of like, is watching the car come and arrive to pick her up to go to her destination. That was the killer app feature that Uber had, and it allowed everyone to see that. And that's what makes something grow viral, when you have that wow moment of seeing that product. So in this story, that person standing on the curb who needs to get to her destination, she's the hero of the story. She needs to be somewhere, that's her problem. But they meet a guide. The guide is, if you're on the website or in the Apple Store, or what really the way it worked is a lot of times the guide was an existing user of the product. That's the best possible guide. And they said, oh, there's this new thing. It's called Uber. They got this 3-step system. Choose a destination, wait for the car, get to the destination. Why don't you install it on your phone? That's the call to action. If you do that, you're going to avoid all the challenges with taxis, et cetera, and then you'll arrive at your destination. So this is what I would wish for each of you, is to come up with your framework for essentially to follow this story brand framework and see how it would apply to your particular business. A lot of companies, and I bet this is true in legal tech, it's not my area of expertise, But a lot of companies, they will have on the homepage of their system, they will talk about their product and the features and all of the cool things it does for you. They will not focus on who the customer is first and get to the problem and then introduce them to the solution. So if you go the story brand system, you can get the book for probably $20, but I'd recommend it's $275 for an annual subscription to this Business Made Simple. There's a bunch of other things that they teach you beyond the story brand system. The next part of this is to give a great demo. So that's yours truly, 40 years ago, standing in front. This is how we did PowerPoint presentations before before PowerPoint existed. So that was at Xerox, and you had to go and get the art department in Xerox to do magic marker versions of your slides, essentially. And so this is a video that they took at the time of something called the Xerox Lone Star demo. This is in the era where no one had seen icons on a desktop, no one had seen drop-down menus. It was very unusual to even have black text on a white background. Xerox was the innovator in all of these things. I'm sure you guys have heard about the way in which Steve Jobs and Bill Gates kind of stole all of this stuff from Xerox. Well, I was at Xerox too, and when I left, I stole it all too. I'm a little less famous than the other two, but the core reason I bring this up is to say that this, I learned later on, and this the law of impatience. A lot of this is from Jason Calacanis. He has a great article on 18 ways in which 18 recommendations for doing a demo. And one of his first ones, and I never heard this one until I heard it from him, was the law of impatience. You have to show your product within the first 60 seconds. So what he does when he hears all these pitches for all these different entrepreneurs and part of incubators and stuff that he's a part of, and he starts this mental stopwatch in his head. And if the person gets to 60 seconds and they haven't shown a demo of their product, what he makes up is their product stinks. Because if you were proud of your product and you thought it was cool and you thought it had great features, you would find a way to get that in front of your potential investor or potential customer early and fast. And so that's kind of rule number one, or one of the 22 immutable laws of giving a great demo. The second law, the law of actions over words, show, don't tell. And so I could sit here when we were doing Ventura Publisher, the first demo that for one of the first startup that I was involved with that was significant. We had the way we structured it essentially was our app demoed really well. It was a desktop publishing system. And so we could have talked about all the reasons we were better than PageMaker and how we had long document support and we could support all of these different word processors. We could have talked, we could have said all of those words. But what we did instead was we brought the person in, the potential OEM that was gonna sign the deal with us. We brought them in, set them down, and we showed them just a screen with a blank screen, and we brought in some text. It was just all one column, filled the whole thing. And then we clicked one button and we made it 2 columns. No one had ever seen that before. So snaps to 2 columns. And then we dropped a picture in the middle of it and it wrapped around the picture. No one had ever seen that before. And so these are like wow moments. And we didn't have to explain the technology behind that or why it worked or any of that kind of stuff. We just had to dive in and show the sizzle basically. One of the other rules that Jason has is the law of, he says 5 minutes, I like 6 minutes. There's a great book called Say It in 6 Minutes. And his point is you have to do your whole demo. You have to be able to do at least a version of your whole demo within 6 minutes. And then he alludes to the fact that Steve Jobs in the first demo of the iPhone 1, it was a 79-minute demo, basically. And he got all the way into 15 minutes and 35 seconds before he showed the product. So you can see that Steve Jobs is like violating these rules. But Steve Jobs is Steve Jobs, and I'm not Steve Jobs. You're not Steve Jobs. So basically, follow these rules. Your presentation will have a much better chance of being successful. Law of anticipation, leave people wanting more. So you don't have to show them every last feature of your product. There'll be plenty of time for that. So, sorry. Actually, can you guys see that? There you go. My computer display times out periodically. The next part of this is designing a tiered price list. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. Jim and I talked about maybe we'll do a whole separate presentation on how to do a tiered price list. I allude to it here because your investors care about the potential return on their investment at some level, and they want to see you make a lot of money, and you want to make a lot of money. And so in my mind, you need to charge more for your products. I haven't seen any of your guys' price lists. I haven't looked at, what your products do. And I'll bet dollars to donuts, you're all undercharging. And you're not giving the market a chance to pay you more for your product. Most people, and I was this way early in my career, they're like a salesperson who's afraid to say the price of the product because, oh, the product costs $100 a month. And then the person says, $100 a month, how could it be that? It should be free. Everyone else's is free. And so they kind of slap you across the face, and you end up giving all of these discounts to people who haven't even asked for it because you're afraid to state what it's really worth. So this is a tiered price list. Now, I'm sure that a lot of you may even have tiered price lists on your system. And again, I'm going to bet I put a lot of money on the fact that they show them in bronze, silver, gold format. Lowest price, medium price, highest price. Completely wrong from a persuasion point of view. We'll get to that in a minute. It should be gold, silver, bronze in that order. A lot of you probably also have labels for these tiers, like small office, medium office, large office version. Also wrong. Let people pick their own tiers. You don't have to tell them which tier is appropriate for them. So if you do it in that way, and you start with tier 1 and walk them through the features of tier 1. What you're leveraging here, this is a company that I'm working with, and they have a product called Growmotely, and they have a product where they manage companies' remote hiring. And the prior version was that they receive 15% premium for handling all of the hires around the world. And they do all the payroll, et cetera, HR stuff. So that was their only product. They only got paid when someone was hired. And yet they were doing all these other services that they weren't being paid for. And if it took people 3 months to hire someone, they got no money until they actually received a hire. So they were beginning to think about, well, maybe you should charge a monthly fee in this. And my advice to them, and where we ended up, was to set a very high price for the product. And the reason you do that is because price is a proxy for value. And so people are not going to value your product if you don't value your product. And so you should have a very high price. It should be 6 to 10 times higher than you could imagine anyone wanting to pay for your product. And so that's kind of how you set that price. Tier 2 price is 3 to 5 times, and then tier 3 is kind of 1 to 2 times what your current pricing level is. So that's the first step. To make this work from a persuasion point of view, we'll talk about this in a minute, the power of contrast. You talk about this column first and you explain the whole column. Now, if you pay that $2,000, you get some cool things. You get free job postings versus a $100 post over here. And you get only 10% of the person's salary is the fee versus 15%. So there's always this kind of countervailing thing here where as the price goes down in one dimension, the benefits that you're receiving are going away, I guess would be the easiest way to say it. What this leads to is a person steps into the pricing model and they kind of pick the price that works for them. So like I said, I can talk at length about this, but when I first did this in my very first, not the very first startup, but when Mac to Win porting technology startup, we had I've heard about this tiered price list model from this wonderful video called the Wally video. And I said, okay, well, our typical price is going to be $3,000 per month to license this software. It's a B2B piece of software for porting Mac products over to Windows. We're the only one in the world that had that. So our little one-liner story was the first and only system for porting Mac applications over to Windows in 2 weeks or less with just a monthly fee. So that one-liner, that area being first, we have a really narrow marketing message. And then the people who heard that message, we show them a price list. And the tier 3 price was $250,000 a year. And the tier 1 price was $250,000 a year, and tier 3 was $36,000 a year. And it cost $2,000 a month to test the software. So we had them priced 8 ways from Sunday, but we offered a money back guarantee. And that's the key thing, is that's the way you reduce the fear of these high prices. People aren't afraid to pick high price if they know if in 3 months or 2 months or 1 month, whatever it is, they can get 100% money back guarantee. And so those things work together for you. Now, what you have to guard yourself against is not having your jaw hit the table when someone comes in and says, I would like tier 1. There's another thing I can guarantee. If you do this and follow the rules, essentially, there will be some company that just views themselves as a tier 1 company. For us, it was Claris. They walked in and they said, they said, well, we're a tier 1 company, so we'll pay you $250K a year. And I managed to, with a straight face, accept their money. And they got a great deal. It was valuable to them because they had a huge app compared to some of these other apps. So it's not completely untethered from reality, but it is part of how you convince someone to pay closer to what you're worth. One last thing to mention there is just to say that by having these high prices, you open up partnerships. So one of the things we're talking about with Growmotely is that they want to add the number of companies that are using their service. There are other companies that they have a couple hundred companies right now. There are other companies that have thousands of companies already working with them in adjacent fields. And so by now having this $2,000 price and the $600 price, they can do a biz dev deal and say, look, if you get 50%, if you get any of your people, maybe 25% or 50% to sign up, we'll give you 50% of the upfront signing fee or the monthly fee that these people are charging. So if someone has 5,000 companies that work with and they can get 1,000 to sign up, that's $1 million per month of found money if they all signed up at tier 1. So essentially, we've created a currency with which to do biz dev deals with nothing more than a price list. And so I can go on, I'll go on at length when we do a seminar on that. Okay, so what's the foundation for all of this? This is, I teach a master's class in persuasion. I like to consider myself humble, but on my website, I've got a 16-page bio, so I haven't really managed to stick with that. But this is one area where I would say that I view myself as world-class, is in this area of persuasion. I learned almost a big chunk of it from this book by Robert Cialdini called Influence: The Psychology of Persuasion. His first example in there is the one that sort of made the most impact on me. He calls it the click whir. And he says, in our brains, because most people, people's brains they're conserving energy, they're trying to do the minimum amount of thinking possible, they don't really multitask. And so when you can push some button in the brain, then this tape whirs out, click, whir, and it just plays out kind of automatically. And so the example that he gave, and I'll tell the story here shortly, a short version of the story. So they wanted to test this out. And so they went to like a blockbuster movie, there's like 100 people in line outside waiting to get into the movie, really long line. And so they sent someone up and the person said, hey, I have a, can I cut in line? And most people, when you're like 100 people, it's kind of like not socially acceptable to just let someone cut in line. You're the second or third person in line. You sort of are worried about what people are going to say. And so not very many people said that, whatever percentage, a low percentage. And then they had people come up and they say, hey, can I cut in line? Because my daughter's already gotten into the theater and I'm worried about her being in there alone. And I'd like to get in there and not have to wait 30 minutes to get in there because I'm worried about her. As you might imagine, almost everyone said yes to that request. It's like, can I get in because my daughter's already in the theater? And so then that was a real because. That was a real because. And then they did what's called a fake because. And so they did similar kind of test where the person came up and they said, hey, can I cut in line because I'd like to be at this spot in line? Completely idiot, stupid fake because. I'd like to cut in line because I'd like to be in this space in line. It doesn't, but what happens is people don't hear past the because. Their brain sort of shuts down and says, oh, they said because, they probably got a good reason. I don't really have to listen for it and analyze it. So I use this in every email that I write, almost every conversation. I have a because. It also forces me to figure out what the real because is. It's kind of sleazy to have a fake because, but when you need one, it's probably okay. But the real because, it forces me to think, what am I doing? What am I asking for that will be important for the other person? And just stick that reason in there. It works whether it's fake or real, but it's nice to have a real one. So perceptual contrast and anchoring, we talked a little bit about that on this prior slide by showing this number of 2,000 and talking about this column first. And going through all of that, and then there's tier 2 at 600, and now there's tier 3 at 100. We have made $100 a month seem like a trivial number, okay? And what will happen is people will start to then negotiate around and say, I'm willing to pay the 100, but I don't want to pay $100 a post, I'll pay $50 a post. As soon as they start making those, I'll take one from column A, one from column B choices, they're a customer, and now they've already transitioned into a customer. We're just haggling over the price. But the point of it is this perceptual contrast. The reason it works is that the order in which you show things is critical. If I don't know how many of you have ever picked up a basketball and know how much a basketball weighs, but if I gave you a bowling ball first and then gave you a basketball, the basketball would feel like there's filled with helium. It weighs almost nothing. But if I want you to think the basketball is heavy, then I give you a ping pong ball first and then give you the basketball. It'll feel like the basketball weighs 16 pounds. So it's all about the order in which you present things. That's also relates closely to another topic, which we'll get into in a little bit, which is anchoring. You never want to let the other, there's an old saying, my uncle who was a car dealer, he worked for GM. He said, watch the people negotiate for a car, the buyer and the manager, and see who gets to, in his version of it, whoever says the number first loses. Turns out that's completely wrong. You want to always anchor and anchor high, and whatever high means in the anchoring that you're doing. And it puts enormous social pressure on the other person to measure their counter offer connected to what you did. It has to be within a reasonable zone, can't be in the insult zone or you get dismissed, but it's much, much, much better to anchor high. So I could go into lots of examples on that. Reciprocity. So if I do something nice for you, it's automatically in our nature to want to do something nice back. This is why people send you money in an envelope and then ask for your business, or send you free labels in an envelope and then ask for a donation. You always want to give before you take. Commitment and consistency. So if you can get anyone to begin to make steps towards your direction in a sales situation or an investment situation, then do that. And you want tiny little steps. A lot of people, when they're asking for a deal, they get too quickly to the ask, and they get too quickly to the let's follow through, let's get the safe sign, let's get here's the wire instructions, blah, blah, blah. You want to do each of those in nice little steps and build what's called a yes ladder. Lots of yeses in a row, and make the first yeses like really small. If I had a gift that I could show you, there was, I think it was an insurance commercial, and they started with this little tiny domino and they pushed it to a bigger and bigger and bigger dominoes. Pretty soon there was like a 3-story high domino that they were able to push over just because they had started and kind of built that sort of flow and that momentum and that consistency. Social proof, safety in numbers, that's pretty obvious. Facebook and others kind of were built completely on that concept. People don't like to do things, don't like to be first. They're worried that they're doing it wrong. So you always want to structure things where they don't have to be first. Liking, trust, people will do more deals if they like you. So smiling with them, using humor, candor. When I mentioned the 32 companies that I started and 25 that failed completely, that's automatic. I do that. Maybe you didn't take it this way, but I believe it hits in the way that people say, oh, this guy's not a jerk, he's not too egotistical, and he's willing to admit his failures and kind of go from there. So all of these are part about beginning to build a persuasive model. So think you pass the sale, authority, scarcity, we'll get into all of those in time. Okay. The last point though I do want to hit is persuasion versus manipulation. So persuasion is when you use these tools. With great power comes great responsibility. You have a lot of power to control situations in this way. If you use these tools to have someone do something in their benefit or for their good, like to convince them to stop smoking or whatever it might be, that's persuasion. If you use these same tools to get these people to do something for you and not for them, potentially harmful for them, that's manipulation. That's what con men do. And so you have to walk a fine line and basically check your conscience as to whether you're doing it right way. So I'm not going to go through all of these points right now, but this is what you're going to see next is essentially, I kind of view it as the Gatling gun of fundraising. It's a way of raising money that no one else uses. It's guaranteed to be successful. It is dramatically, it is wrapped in all kinds of these persuasion techniques. And that's why it works. And we'll get into what each of those are as we go through it. So here we are. This is called the startup funding life cycle. This will be the last slide in your deck. It's where you should spend at least 5 or 10 minutes in your pitch to be on this slide. This is the slide that investors, that it's their first company they're investing, and very sophisticated investors all the way up to VCs want to see a slide like this, because it condenses what is normally like 5 or 6 slides into one slide. And so here's how it works. So what and why it works. So the first step is that we want to show all of the rounds of funding. So we have past, present, and future. So in this particular company, they're raising money in this round right here. So they had the founding round, advisors, friends, and family. Those are behind them. This is the current round. And then these are future rounds, strategic investors. You can see how much I love those, and financial investors. So that's the first differentiation. I've never encountered anyone else in a funding pitch that shows all of the rounds. And yet it's the most honest way to tell the story, because whoever's investing in this round, there's going to be dilution in these future rounds. Now, you don't really know what those valuations are going to be, and you don't really know how much you're going to raise, but I think it's more honest to say that there will be subsequent rounds, and these are the amounts that are going to be in those rounds. You want to essentially, sorry, I want to make sure I get these in the right order. Okay, so the next part is to assert a post-money valuation. So we always want to work with a post-money valuation. It's much easier to do the math, again, friendlier for the potential investors, because you don't want, pre-money is kind of a trap that the sort of VCs play, because they can push more money into the company and have higher dilution using a pre-money approach. So by having a post-money approach, we've said exactly what we're willing to take money at, and then the amount raised, I sort of usually recommend 5 to 10% of the post-money is the amount to be raised. I'm a big believer in lots of rounds, especially in these early stages where there's key milestones that you have to hit to justify the next round. This is kind of the real because. So we're raising, so this 250K was raised because we wanted to accomplish these milestones. And the because is what justifies the next step up in valuation. So you're essentially sending a signal of what you're going to use the money for. Everyone else puts use of proceeds on a different slide. To me, this is the slide that it belongs on, because it corresponds directly to what the next round is going to happen. You're also predicting the future. This is called thinking past the sale, where you're getting people to think about, just by having it on here. Most times when these slides are up, I never ever recommend that the entrepreneur, or if I'm doing it, say 250 million, or say 50 million, or say we're going to be a unicorn, or say any of those things. People hate to be sold, but they love to buy. Okay, let them figure out what those, you can put them on here, and just the fact that they're written down carries enough rhetorical weight for them to be there. But you don't have to say, oh, and get your 50K in now, because that's going to be worth 2.5 million out here if you just hang on and blah blah blah. That's not going to be effective. What's effective is to just have them on the sheet. But you can see that these steps up in valuation, they're stepwise, they're round numbers. This is another Craig Johnson. Always use round numbers. Just make the math easy for people. 2.5 million, 5 million, 10, 50, 250. Because we usually recommend 10%, you just divide this number by 10. That's what 1% of the company costs. Super easy for everyone to do. Depending upon the stage, in these early stages when it's primarily friends and family, and they may not have a big check that they can't write a big check, but they can write a 25K check in this case. And so we broke it up into effectively 10 1% slots. And the most important investor in any given round is the first investor to come in. That's why you break it up into, here we're doing 5 1% slots and 1 5% slot. So the reason why you make those first slots easy hurdles to get over is because they do the one thing that is hard for you to do. You've asserted this valuation, but you still might get someone arguing that valuation with you, because that's what buyers like to do, is they like to argue with the seller. So you need to get over that. So you need to find one buyer who believes that valuation. That's what this first investor's role is that because after this person is in, none of these other people will argue valuation anymore. They do not like to argue with fellow investors and tell the fellow investors, you were an idiot to accept this valuation. It should have been 1 million at the most. They will not do that. You will have, Warren Buffett says there's 2 ways to value a company. Sum total of all future sum total of discounted future cash flows. That's impossible to calculate for any company on the planet. Okay, so you might as well just set that aside, unless maybe you could do an accounting firm that has the 5,000th accounting firm in the country that grows at a certain level. Maybe you could begin to do that, but none of these startups can use that method. So the only other method that he says matters is what arm's length deal between a buyer and seller. And as soon as you have that, you've established a valuation. You also don't have to set a valuation. I hate this concept of comps and what the market is supporting right now, and blah, 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 blah. It's not really that way. You just have to you just have to convince enough people to invest in your company to close the round. Not that everyone in Silicon Valley believes that that's a fair valuation. So you want to show these. The other thing is momentum. All of these. I think of these investors as like dominoes. Get those first dominoes to fall. The rest come easily. We use yellow to highlight, the open slots, the kind of key data points. That's another perceptual contrast thing that jumps out on the slide. We show the subsequent investors. These are potential acquirers. There's safety in numbers, which is a social proof. So we see no one else shows kind of the cap table of who came before you, and no one shows who comes after you that's going to be valuing the company in these ranges. So I could go on, but that's probably, I want to stick with what we have. So wrapping up, what Jim and I would like to do, we've been at a lot of these dogs playing poker tables. Jim and I have seen a lot of hands through the years. So there's, what we want to be is the little bulldog there slipping you an ace under the table. It's your job to play your hand as the CEO of your company, the founder of your company. But there's probably once in a while something that we've seen before, and we can give you some insights as to maybe how to manage that. Maybe that's a tiered price list. Maybe that's how to tell the story. Maybe that's how to find the right audience. I mean, all of those things are part of what I think we can bring to the table. We'd love to meet with you one-on-one and just hear your story and see if we might be able to be helpful. So Jim, I think that's kind of where we are.
That's great. Let me open it up for any questions you guys might want to ask live.
Or just put them in the chat.
Yeah, or put them in the chat. We had one, I think, from Carolyn on, I think she was talking about when you're talking about the, go back to the principles of persuasion slide.
Okay. This
right.
One?
Yeah, I think the question, Carolyn, you can clarify it, that we're talking about here use of proceeds in terms of the, here it is. Oh, Scott's taking off. I think she's asking about whether or not the click were and the perceptual contrast, are those in the context of how you explain the use of proceeds?
No, I would say this is, for me, I guess, this is the context of how I live my life. We all negotiate every single day in every single location. You'll probably do better at Starbucks, not by getting a different price, but by just having a better day. If you smile at the person giving you the drink, that's liking. Perceptual contrast, you can see, just to go over this, when we use this, when we assert stepwise post-money valuations, that's perceptual contrast because we're showing how it increases over time. And there we want to show it increasing because the person in the current round wants to see those bigger numbers later. They're getting the deal because they're getting in at a low price versus the higher prices later. So that's an example within that frame, but it really comes everywhere. I mean, when you talk about, like the integration costs of your software into a law firm might be trivial compared to the integration costs of, your competitor. So what I would talk about in a scenario like that is I would say competitor XYZ, because their software lacks all these cool things that we have, they have an integration cost of about $2,000 per attorney. With ours, because it's so easy to use, and here's some cool feature that proves that, ours is only $50 an attorney. So you can always use perceptual contrast to put yourself in a better light. If I could, this is probably in every domain of life, but if you have a specific area about like how would you use it for X, Y, or Z, I'm happy to answer that.
Hey, yeah, sorry. Yeah, I was just thinking of when you were talking about people cutting through line,
Yep.
because the first one had a good reason, because I thought it was in relation to, when you ask for money and you have a reason which is tied to the budget of what you're going to spend it on. But I guess that comes through in your financial plan that you show.
Well, it also, I guess it comes up, well, okay, let's just make up an example. So let's say someone says, wow, 5 million, that's a pretty rich valuation. You don't have your first one in to justify it. Why do you think that valuation is fair? Well, we think that valuation is fair is because we've studied these 5 other companies that raise money and they have blah, blah, blah. You have your because. You're not stumbling over, well, what valuation do you think would be fair? Or, well, we just kind of put that out there, but we're willing to see what the market will bear. That's that to me is a very weak and unconvincing response. But now let's say you didn't have that data, you know, that these 3 companies were funded at a different level, and you wanted to use the fake because, you know, you might say, well, we asserted a $5 million valuation because our advisors suggested that. You still had the because. It doesn't have any retort. It doesn't have any. If someone analyzed the sentence, they wouldn't say, "Oh, you've convinced me," but you had the because. So, other questions or comments?
I think that point about valuations is a really good one, because you really have to suspend disbelief in early stage financings, because there is no principled valuation. It's really a matter of supply and demand and persuasion, as you pointed out, Lee. It's not about the discounted sum of future earnings.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the way I usually would answer it, because everyone is going to, you'll always get, as people have more deal flow, they'll be more likely to push on valuation because they'll have their own comps. And so the way to answer that is that, look, if you're investing in this company because of the current valuation, then you should not invest in this company. You're going to lose your money. 95% of the time, people lose money. So if you're putting 50K into this company, you're going to lose it. If you want to double your money, take your 50K and go to Vegas and put on red or black. You have a 50% chance of doubling your money. That's a great place to put your money if you want that. However, if you want to turn 50K into $1 million or $2 million, because of those columns on the right, not our current valuation, but our subsequent exit valuation, that's where, if you want to, then do not take your 50K and buy, you know, $50,000 worth of lottery tickets. That's a 1 in 100 million chance of getting $1 million or $2 million. We're only a 1 in 50 or 1 in 100, 1 in 200. And it doesn't really matter if the valuation is 5 million or 10 million or 2 million. If it's 2 million, you're not going to have very motivated founders, because the amount of dilution that we're going to have to get that 500K to do what we need will have given up 40% of the company. We're not, so that's not really in your interest. You're sort of better served if you accept the valuation that works for us and works for you. So there's 1,000 ways to answer that valuation question that we can help you with if you're getting it, and your current answers aren't convincing people to accept your valuation.
Okay, I think we're at time. I want to thank everybody for coming, and the door remains open for any more Q&A that you want to do. You know how to reach us. Thank you, guys, and let us know your suggestions for the next workshop, and we'll see you then.
Thank you, everyone.